So just shoot for a little while.
Right channel.
Test the camera.
Left channel. In phase.
Let me just see real quick. Gary, you want to test? I plugged in mine, and the projector works. You want to plug in yours, turn your computer on, and make sure it's good to go?
Out of phase.
Go back to
Somebody's looking at the audio files.
Yeah, I don't know, some of the things that.
Huh?
Somebody was just saying something about the audio.
In phase.
No, I'll put a sign there that should be able to find it.
Software is
The only thing,
wind blows.
everything's in that box, the deck, everything, so you're trying, but you cannot just turn it
I should have on my mouse.
It's in it. Oh. That's
You
all
want
right.
the lights back on? I just turned off so we can see the screen better.
It's fine, I can still see everyone.
Okay.
So thank you, Gary. Now, if I can remember to turn the microphone on. They have an audio like that? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as well.
All right. I will, of course, have some of that in the presentation. And I already saw that AJ has read some of my stuff, or some stuff about me.
I think this is yours. This is mine.
And that makes me feel more comfortable. I won't be shocking everybody, because I have a kind of an unusual presentation. Has anybody seen on the DIY audio talk group, I don't know offhand how to find it on the internet, but apparently there was a raging controversy going on about this, where Siegfried Linkwitz challenged the AES to show what would be the optimum radiation pattern, speaker positioning, and room treatment for stereo. And so our club up north took up the project and had him ship some Orions in. And that's what this is about. And that's how I want to introduce this. Because, has anybody seen this? You don't know about the Orion Challenge? Anyway, there was this controversy about what is this IMP speaker and who is Gary Eckmeyer? And I didn't even know it was happening. Then somebody that lives in St. Pete somewhere clued me in, and so I looked in on it, and it went on and on and on for 350 messages or something. So what is going on? So I want to show that first, and then I'll show my presentation. They're both relatively short. I got to stay within 30 minutes, right? You'll see my time control.
Do the slides have a description of what each speaker is?
Yes.
How long have you been in St. Pete? You're in St. Pete?
No, I'm in Lakeland.
Oh, Lakeland. How long have you been down here? You been here a while, or?
25 years.
Oh, and we.
That's why I had so much trouble getting to the meetings, because I'm in Lakeland, and I sometimes have health problems with driving and stuff. So my daughter helped drive this time. She's getting her permit. All right, go through this quickly. I told you what the question was from Linkwitz, and they did it in January.
Everybody knows Siegfried Linkwitz makes the Orions. You can do kits, and it's an open baffle design, right?
Yeah, basically a dipole.
I'm sure AJ's familiar with it.
Okay, the core group met several times and tested things. We found that we had to equalize the frequency response so that that wasn't a distraction from the spatial qualities, which is what we were trying to test.
You want imaging, basically, and
Yes, because if the speakers you're switching in between to compare to each other have totally different frequency responses, well, you know what I mean by totally, enough to notice, then you get confused, because the question is, which speaker is presenting an auditory scene better than the other? So, 3 program selections, Harry James and a couple of others. One was a mono voice just talking.
where was this done?
In
In Lakeland?
Michigan, in
Michigan. Okay.
Novi, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
This is his room that he kind of slaughtered to make it to Linkwitz and my specs. It's rather reflective walls. You notice that? Especially behind the speakers.
Is this just somebody's home?
Yes, Dave Clark's. How many know Dave Clark? All amplifiers sound the same?
Well, kind of rings a bell.
But might as well use it. That's the IMP. A homemade kludge of wall speakers. There's one wall speaker on each face of this square box. And that's the Orion.
So that's your design, right, the IMP?
Yes. I just made it in a couple of months, real quick, because I'm not a speaker builder myself. I just wanted to see if I could enter this competition because I knew how to win it.
Huh.
And that's the standard speaker with a woofer and a tweeter on it.
It's a Behringer,
a Behringer, yeah.
Studio monitor.
And that's my specified speaker positioning, which is very important to my theory.
Left, front.
The results,
stand for?
huh?
What does IMP stand for?
Image model projector. The results that kind of made them mad at me is a plus 0.32, the Ekmeyer, the only speaker that was judged better than the reference.
What was the reference?
The Orion.
The Orions, okay.
That we equalized everything to the Orion, as a matter of fact. So,
Cheesy box and multiple cheap in walls.
how did this character win? We didn't expect him to win this thing, but okay. And then he's relaying my reasoning on why it won. Because it had more reflected than direct sound in it.
Kind of like Bose, huh?
Yes.
That's what it's in.
Okay.
How many people were in that challenge? How many people listened? I guess,
About 9 or so.
and they were supposedly all golden-eared audiophiles, I presume, or?
Yeah.
This is all
I'm
programmed?
saying that is in here.
I'm not sure.
I gotta be honest, I don't understand the original question. What was the original question?
The original question was supposed to be what type of radiation pattern and reflectivity of a room is ideal for stereo imaging, for creating what's called an audio scene, which is the orchestra or the band playing in your room.
Like a multi-dimensional
Soundstage,
soundstage.
spatial.
I'll get into that. Siegfried calls it the auditory scene, the AS, the auditory scene. He has a very reflective room in his home, and he noticed that he doesn't just get speaker or stereo from speaker to speaker. It fills his whole front of his room, and he's wondering what causes that, and that's why he had the challenge, because he had some theories and wanted to see if anybody else did too. I found that no, nobody else does. In fact, this may be so different. If you didn't see some of my stuff already, you might get mad at me. Because it kind of, if I'm right, it means we've been operating on the wrong stereo theory, or no stereo theory, for the last 75 years. Speaker design suffers from that, speaker positioning, room treatment. The whole thing has to change if I'm right.
So the IMP speakers are completely your design,
Yeah.
your concept, okay?
Okay. Anybody, how does stereo work?
The brain processes direct and reflective sound, close. To create a
That's
stereo
better,
image.
yeah. It all started with this guy, of course, and he is more of a two speakers, two ears fellow. The stereo happening at the head, because they were thinking, you know, well, there's a speaker here in the right, a speaker here in the left, and they got drivers on the front, and they shoot their sound into my two ears, and I perceive stereo psychoacoustically in my brain. Is that about what everybody thinks?
Yeah, generally.
Okay. Kind of like that. That's what you always see when you look up in a textbook, how does stereo work? Two speakers and a listener, sometimes an equilateral triangle. and that's the way it has been, you can kind of tell that that's how it is with the market. Where are all the drivers on these things? Nobody has even tried to put them on the back, except for one fellow that is in Massachusetts and became very famous for a radical different design, and of course you know who that is. How many of you remember when the Bose 901 came out?
Unfortunately, yes.
Because I don't know who's as old as I am. I'm 71. And it caused quite a stir, but it could also cause a lot of controversy if you used it wrong. Anyway, that's what I knew as stereo when it first came out. So what happened was I had a kind of a Damascus moment. One of those things that that grabs you and you can't let go of it. Well, this event grabbed me and held on through the halls of the Bose Corporation all the way to a podium at the AES. And I just can't stop studying it because even I don't understand all about it. I would lie awake at night trying to think about, does this really work? And I would question my own self. So I was in England where the walls are quite reflective, and I had my 901s, and they sounded as crappy as everybody else thinks they do. But I observed the English and a lot of audiophiles position their speakers a lot differently than the Bose manual had it. They would say, position them at least 1.5 feet from all walls and you'd be fine. Didn't work. And so before I went out to the audio store to try to listen to something else and trade them in, I moved them radically out from the walls. Like you might put some Maggies or Martin Logans or something. And all of a sudden, everything came into focus. There was depth, there was spaciousness, but there was also focus. The singer that was in the center between the speakers was like a floating head right there in my room. Not coming from the speakers, but coming from my room in between the speakers and slightly behind. Maybe you've experienced that with your Maggies and stuff. It's a type of imaging that's a lot superior to speaker. Sometimes they're in there, sometimes they're in there, and sometimes there's some in the middle. But it's not a complete auditory scene. So, what I realized by that experience was that the reflected sound is part of the deal. It's not an inhibitor of stereo, it's a helper. So, I wrote a letter to the Bose telling them how their manual was wrong. And a result of that was a phone call from him. And he loves to teach, so he talked for 1.25 hours to me in England and talked about direct and reflected sound, room acoustics, a lot of stuff.
What year was this?
About 83. And at the end of the call, he tells me about something that's coming up that I'm going to be very interested in, and I'm going to buy one. And you know what it was? It was a Bose car system in a Cadillac. All right, pressing on. Trip to the mountaintop. I met with, he wasn't there at that time, but his chief engineer, Joe Varanth, told me a secret. Not a big secret, it's just I'm very visual and I want a method of drawing things on a piece of paper that give me a clue as to why this sounded better than any other way. He said, if you draw a picture of the reflections as an image on the other side of the walls, you all know that technique, what I'm illustrating there.
Is that for a mirrored room? Okay.
Right, acoustically it's a mirrored room, but visually now we're showing there what you're really hearing. You're not hearing that, just that, with a reflecting type speaker. You're hearing that, which explains how it gets so big. The main comments from people in the 901 days was, it's so big, and it sounds like they're right in the room with you. So I started making drawings using that concept, and moving things around to see if that would be good. What do you suppose would happen there if you had the speakers too wide?
I think the center stage start disappearing on you.
Right. There'd be a hole in the middle. I've always wondered what caused that hole in the middle, and there it is. It would also...
If you angle in, though, toe them in towards the center, even with the reflections, wouldn't that tend to fill in?
Yeah, that would help a little bit.
It depends on the directional characteristics
Yeah.
of the
Anyway, what I see is two clusters of sound instead of a solid field. And so I came to this conclusion. You see, all those direct and reflected virtual speakers are equally spaced from each other. My room is 20 feet wide. I have my speakers 5 feet from the front wall and from the side walls. So I started studying, and I went to the AES and joined up and met all these people. And
What's your background? Do you have an engineering background, or?
Industrial design is my background, but I've never worked in it. I'm a retired Air Force officer, but I love trying to design things and think through problems. Anyway, that's my paper that I got to present. Never got published, but show you how that works, I think, in here. The Mark Davis, in a famous paper in Hi-Fi magazine, or it might have been Stereo Review, he taught us that there's the audible characteristics of speakers are the frequency response, the radiation pattern, power, how loud can they go, room placement, and room acoustics. We've been studying all these 75 years, that one, of course. Almost every article you read has something to do with frequency response. If you put it closer to the wall, more bass, point it towards you or away from you, all this stuff. But very little about radiation pattern. There's some room placement stuff, like Bob Harley's article that he has in some anthology, the 10 secrets of speaker placement. Did you ever see that? All of them wrong, for the wrong reasons. If you're asked or you read about what are the types of speakers, you might be tempted to reply ribbon, regular drivers, or whatever is making the sound, thinking that that is the secret of one speaker from another. The different types of speakers really are a direct radiator, an omni, dipole, bipole, and then mine is a unique design. It has 4 sides, and the front 2 sides are adjustable as to their strength, so I can vary the front radiation pattern. And the rear drivers have about 6 to 10 dB more than the front drivers. Again, the image model is what we are actually hearing. Here's, in case that isn't abundantly clear, if you have more sound going to the rear, it lights up those reflected versions so that you have an image shift toward the rear, which causes the sound to appear in an area behind the actual speakers and in front of the wall slightly, with a good impression of varying depth, I think. But the width of the sound image is now wall to wall, not speaker to speaker, which you probably have experienced as well, and that's what causes it.
What happens in an asymmetric room?
Well, you don't want to have an asymmetric room, but it could work. You might just think of your room as, what happens if I put some live performers in here? Would they sound good or not?
Right.
So, if you have direct firing speakers, this is what I perceive is a sound stage that's more like this. But when you have some reflected sound in the equation, that's what sound stage I perceive at home. Never do I hear any sound coming directly from the speakers, even if it's an extreme left or right instrument.
What about if you're not sitting in the sweet spot, if you're off axis a little bit, how does that change?
I've got that coming up. If you think about the relationship to live sound, like why should my theory be any better compared to live sound, which is the goal, right, than standard theory, where the direct sound is cast towards your head and you're supposed to perceive all this? What I'm doing is placing the sound in the room rather than in my head. And with a live orchestra, of course, you get the same reflections. This is what causes the quality difference between halls. A good hall has a lot of side-going energy and a reasonable reverberation time, right? And the imaging, there's a lot less direct sound as you go back in the hall, a lot more as you come forward. I have found at times that if I can not only go left to right in my room and the center image will stay stable. I also have a center speaker. But I can walk right up to the speakers, stick my head in between them, and I can hear the instruments coming from behind them because they're being reflected from the wall, but it seems almost magical.
How do you calculate the reflective sound versus the direct sound so that they get this coordination that you're referring to?
Well, I've found if I had basically all direct firing, I would hear the sound coming from the speakers. If I have pure omnis, it's pretty good. Now it's starting to cook. If I go back about 6 dBs more for the reflected sound, then it releases itself from the speakers. And you get this depth and spaciousness. But the secret to this whole operation is the positioning of the speakers, because the reflected sound images too. If you thought you were making the sound wider by moving the speakers wider, you were fooling yourself, because the reflections from the sidewall came closer. So you must put your speakers 1/4 of the room width from the side and the front walls.
How does it sound with non-orchestral music, but something more electronic?
Great.
Not any reflections in real life.
It works on everything. You know, they say that some speakers are better for classical and some for jazz and all this stuff, but mine is fine for everything. In fact, it's a lot of fun to switch, say, a test record between tracks, and you see these different audio pictures depending on the recording engineer and what kind of stuff is in
What
there.
happens if you're missing a wall? Like, let's say the left wall doesn't exist because you have a kitchen over there or something.
Well,
Like a lot of people
It's like a
have.
hypothetical rule there.
Like my house.
it wouldn't spread that direction then. This is my first imp that I built, 15, 20 years ago. It didn't sound very good. This is my current ones. I got a friend in Indiana, Bloomington, to build them for me, because I don't know how to build speakers. I just know what I want. So I told him that I want them to have 4 sides and variable driver's strength to the rear and the front. And then later we thought up the idea of variable front radiation pattern. And he knew how to make these and make them sound good. And he's now on the panel at Parts Express to do designs for them that people can buy and then build with Parts Express parts.
Who is it?
So he's one of the best, Dan Newbecker.
Uh,
I always have my electronics in the next room over, so it's not so ugly.
Was that your room just now that we saw?
Yes,
In Lakeland?
yes.
And when is the meet?
Actually,
When we
I'm
come-
glad that we could do this now, because it's possible that we could have a meeting next month at my place and demonstrate all of this blather that I'm telling you.
Richard Renaissance?
Anyway, that's electronics.
It's not going to be the secretary, too.
Here's the speaker. And now, do you know about the DBX Soundfield 1? Mark Davis
Yeah, I remember that.
did the radiation pattern so that when you went off center, the farther speaker had a more direct sound towards you, and the imaging stayed stable in the center. And so I made that a part of my design too, besides the direct and reflecting. The two pots up there can vary the front panels. I have more strength going on the inner front panel than on the outer. So that when you go, say you walked over to be in front of the left speaker, the right speaker would be more directly towards you and it would be louder than the left speaker. So it stayed, the imaging stayed stable. And if that wasn't the right ratios, then you could adjust them with those pots.
You adjust just by ear or?
Yeah.
Just by ear?
Isn't there interference between the drivers?
Oh, you mean because they're on all four sides?
Yeah.
No.
The domes don't radiate omnidirectionally?
Maybe part of Dan's talents, but he knew how to make the select the drivers and make the radiation pattern and so on, so that it didn't construct or destructively interfere like that, like you're thinking of.
Usually you use like a horn or a waveguide to accomplish that kind of directional, front directional.
Yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? They'd be more powerful too. But that's the way. So that's one thing that I hate is hearing the sound coming directly from a speaker. That's one of my kill factors for listening. Okay, we talked about that. Current stereo theory being head related rather than room related. And the room is just something they don't know what to do with. It's there, we got to put a bunch of padding on it, right? The radiation pattern is mainly direct. There's not much said about speaker positioning except as it affects frequency response, right? Now that's not a, when I say those things, it's not a universally applied accusation. I just mean that that's the way most of them seem to be thinking. And they try to, there's even direction to audiophiles to find out where the first reflection of the speaker's point is and then put some padding there so you kill it.
I'm glad Mark's not here.
And don't be offended.
Confusion more than absorption.
Image model theory is room related. You could construct a stereo system without any relation or any relationship to the human hearing system. It studies how to make sound in rooms, not in your head, and it's related to acoustics. The room is not a nuisance variable, but an essential part of constructing that image model. The radiation pattern is designed in rather than accidental. Speaker positioning is, as you saw, part of the theory. And I've got specular reflectivity at the front of my room. So you'll say, well, that's foolish. You're going to get a bunch of stuff going around your room, and you don't want to have that. But it passes the clap test. You can hear that, can't you? You want to be able to clap in your room and not hear a, what do you call it?
Stop echo.
Anyway, slap echo, slap echo. And so that is true of my room as well, because there's more absorption as you go back in the room. So that image model making all the direct and reflected sounds coming towards the back of the room, that gets absorbed and doesn't come back to the front, so it can slap back.
Do you have a cathedral ceiling? I was trying
Yes,
to get that.
yes. I don't know how to go backwards in these things, do you?
I kind of vaguely remember seeing that, yeah.
We'll see that.
Okay, this was going to be what I was going to talk about at first until I decided to go more technical. This is just when I was running around the country, meeting as many people as I could, talking about my theory and seeing if I could find any bit of information that would discourage me from it. Anyway, I met a lot of people. John Atkinson was out when I was in England. He was editor of Hi-Fi News. He was demonstrating how the PCM F1 was inaudible. Now, of course, a lot of them talk about bad digital and stuff. But, and Peter Walker was there.
What was the source of that turntable?
Yeah, I think it
And we're
was.
putting the digital chain on an analog system, and there's no difference in the sound.
That was when the CDs first came out. But I think it might have been a turntable. Okay, I went to Skywalker Ranch. Monster cable. David Clark was commissioned to see if Noel Lee could actually hear his own cables. So we went there and we set up a double blind box for him to be able to switch back and forth between one of his cheaper cables and his new one that he was going to be pushing. So we let him sit there for hours trying to identify a difference between the cables so that he could then press the correct answer when he went to the full test. He never did identify a difference between them.
But I bet he still sold them.
Yeah, sure. I suggested to Dave that we go find some Radio Shack cables and stick them in there, but we didn't do that. He's a nice guy. He took us to lunch and everything. Count Basie, I met Count Basie. It's one of my pride and joys. It was amazing. Told us about how Ellington died and sent Christmas cards in the summer because he knew he was going. He sent Christmas cards to all of his friends early. And I met Harry Pearson. I don't know how I got that in my record, but I was going to be a writer for The Perfect Vision because I wrote an article about my projector and they liked the way I write. And I wrote an article about a convention that I went to and all the equipment that they had there, and they liked that. So I went to the Perfect Vision editor, and he took me over Seacliff, and I saw the Infinity IRSs standing there in a closet somewhere, just sitting and collecting dust. And Arnie Nudell was in adjusting one of his new speakers. And then Pearson came bounding down the stairway in his pajamas, which I thought was kind of unusual at 2 p.m.
Classic Pearson.
I don't know. He just talked about writing style. My God. So, that's about it from this station. Like I said, my wife might have a trip to Europe or to Israel next month. I don't know the dates yet, but would it be a possibility if it's open and we don't bother her because she's got headaches and she can't have a lot of loud music, but if she's not there, then I would say that would be a good time to try it, unless somebody else has ideas. I hate to take up 2 months in a row.
Oh, I think piqued our curiosity certainly with this.
Yeah, push it first in November, is that okay?
Well, I think that was saying November for you. So yeah, we got October's open, so check your calendar.
Oh, he's on.
Okay, well-
Okay, so you.
Perfect.
Perfect, yeah. Perfect time to be on.
I'm not saying yet because I'm not sure about that, but
No pressure.
just like to know if that's okay.
The next agenda is what are you serving to eat?
Halloween candy.
So,
Last year's.
I was saying, have you ever tried to partner, if you ideally think you possibly partner with a manufacturer with this concept to commercially make it available?
oh, no, I haven't tried anything yet. Most of them don't believe me and wouldn't, not invented here. You ever hear that?
Yeah.
I tried to send a couple of drawings a long time ago to Bose, and they just disappeared. I suggested to Dan Newbecker when he became a designer for the Parts Express that he might use our design, but he said, nah. Some reason he gave, they're a little complex and people wouldn't understand. I don't know. Anyway.
Very expensive, Gary, by the time you build it, market it, sell it?
Yeah. Get with me later.
I saw you had a subwoofer in the corner, I believe, in your setup.
Yeah, Veldine.
Okay, so how, the main speakers, what type of frequency response do you get in the room, because that's what counts?
I should have brought a slide of that, but it's very even. I've got one of those Behringer DEQ 2496s, that you can make the frequency response whatever curve you draw. So I let it go pretty well, equalizes itself right to that curve, and then I see which ones are very too much. The adjacent sliders are too wide apart, and I adjust that down to get it. And I kind of fudge the thing. But it's very smooth in a room curve, or a hall curve as we call it, sloping down slightly towards the high end, and then sloping up at the low end. Seems like there's too much bass when you see it measured, but when you listen to a variety of recordings, it's correct.
What type of crossovers does it have? Are those
Just
Omni, or rather like coaxial drivers that do the full frequency response, or how do you have them the design?
they are crossed over between the mid-range and the tweeters with his kind of complex crossover design, which I don't understand that stuff. And they roll off naturally at 100, and that's where I meet the Velodynes.
Okay.
So your bass is mono below 100 hertz? Your bass is mono below 100 hertz?
Yes. Just from the Velodyne.
Just one Velodyne, okay.
Yeah.
It should be directional, probably. They say, 70 or 80 thereabouts. Is that what they say? Typically, anything above 70 or 80, you may be able to localize on bass or not?
We can localize down to about 80 hertz or so.
Could be.
Roughly.
It's amazing.
However, for stereo content, you want to maintain channel separation down to about 40 hertz because of lateralization, which means you can actually distinguish the spatial effects, even though you can't localize the point where it's coming from. Localization means that you can't point out where it's coming from, natural source. But lateralization means that you can tell the difference between a mono signal and a stereo signal down to about 40 hertz or so.
AJ's a speaker builder, designer of Soundfield Audio that he does on the side. Pretty knowledgeable.
And Ed, where's Ed?
Ed Ventura.
Oh, okay.
You're ahead of me, right? You've built some speakers that have drivers on the rear and all this stuff.
I bought AJ built them for me.
AJ is ahead of
I
me.
work on very similar concepts to what you're talking about, using the reflections of the room. It's all in line with what Tool and the AS have been finding.
Yeah.
And David's got some speakers that he built too. We have a few speaker builders in the club, so it's always interesting. This is a very unique perspective, which we're certainly anxious to hear.
I thought it was important enough to call for a whole new stereo theory because of what you saw there.
Well, it would be new to audiophiles, but if you read the AES and all the stuff that Tool's been putting out lately, you're completely in line with what he's been saying.
It doesn't contradict any known good engineering facts. Tools saying a wide dispersion, wide and smooth frequency response, and like that. He doesn't go as far as seeing to the rear, but
well, there's some speakers that are like, a lot of us in the club have dipole, electrostatic, ribbon, planar magnetic, because we like that reflective sound. Same concept. You're using the room and the depth of the sound stage being enhanced from that rear wave, as long as it doesn't cancel.
do you aim them so that the direct sound crosses in front of you?
I personally play that. I have Martin Logan electrostatic speakers. I played with that and found it at times helpful, especially for off-axis listening.
Yeah.
Okay. But for the absolute clarity of the imaging, I prefer to follow their recommended toe-in, which is a little less aggressive. So it crosses probably a little bit behind you.
If you could make a drawing and kind of imagine how the virtual reflected images are putting out and maybe work with it that way, I hope this gives some insight as to how to play with that. Their radiation pattern isn't the same as mine, but that's why you enjoy those kind of speakers. So,
it'd be interesting to have a turntable, a remote-controlled turntable platform that your speakers are on, where you could dial in while you're sitting in the sweet spot and elsewhere, remotely control spin. Remotely.
He can remotely adjust the rear radiation of his speakers.
Not remotely.
No, I can't.
So you can add reflections to the room or
Oh, okay.
depending on the program.
So same thing, you got basically like attenuating or some type of backing up the decibel.
All right, have you found more rear radiation to be preferable?
He's got to say, yeah. It depends on the program material. That's what I was saying.
Oh.
With electronic recordings where there are no natural reverberations. In other words, if a rock band is playing here, yes, you're hearing reflections from the room, but when you get those types of recordings, any sort of reverberation is already in the recording. Adding extra ones in the room gives it a false sense of reality. Whereas with acoustic recordings,
Yeah.
such as jazz and orchestral stuff, adding back the reflections in the room is critical to making it sound more realistic.
Interesting.
Channel stereo captures about 10 to 15% of the actual sound field that's in an actual concert hall. About 80
if we
to
ever-
90% of it is lost with two-channel recordings.
If we ever do a comparison test, then I'm going to tap you to tell what kind of cuts to use. Anyway, in back,
Yeah, just two questions. One is, how does your theory apply to a rather dead room? And two, what's your take on wall speakers?
well, if the room is dead, like they've put all kinds of sonics all over the place,
Yeah, well, my listening room is quite dead naturally, so how would that work?
you would hear mostly the direct sound then, right? Or if there was any reflected sound, it would not have the same frequency response as the direct sound.
Right.
So the reflected images would be rolled off. One of the other advantages of the direct and reflected design with specular reflectivity is that everything has the same frequency response. And all the frequencies meet at one point, slightly behind the actual speakers. A direct firing speaker has a narrowing radiation pattern as the frequencies go up, obviously. And so as the different instruments play and get different frequencies in the mix, you get varying radiation patterns, and it's confusing, and it draws attention to the speaker grills, and I just hate it. But if it's more reflected than direct, then it seems to make all the frequencies come together and all radiate the same, the highs as well as the lows, and it's very enjoyable.
And what is your take on the Walsh driver, which is saying with one pulsating? It's an
Wall striker, like the old,
Yeah, the ohms, yeah.
the omnidirectional.
OMFs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good speaker. I heard a comparison between the Bose 901s and
Yes, and
the OMFs and the Magnaplaners in one store, and there wasn't much difference between them all.
There's a new design speaker, like NBL does that to some extent, the German design. They have another German manufacturer that has an omnidirectional design.
I remember the name of it.
There's a new Canadian company called Pure Audio that is doing a omnidirectional electrostatic. And I heard them at was it in Chicago? Pardon me? Expo. And very interesting, what they did is they had they had chairs all over the room and asked you to sit even behind, sitting in the corner and so forth. And indeed, with this design, which capitalizes on that, you have, I wouldn't say it's perfect imaging, but you had imaging no matter where you were in the room, okay, which was fascinating. And especially with the speed and the clarity of an electrostatic design, all those pairs, the hybrid design with the standard driver woofer portion, which is also omnidirectional to some extent. Very interesting design, but they sell for about $80,000 a pair.
There's an engineer named David Moulton who was one of my inspirations, who encouraged me, and he made a speaker, and it was produced by B&O, called Beolab 5. Bayo 5.
Yeah,
Bang Rooses.
yeah, very nice.
Yes.
I remember seeing that. That's more, yeah.
And that's his version of my speaker. Not that it had in reference to mine, but similar idea.
Have you ever tried to patent it, this concept, or you think it's just too many? It's not really patentable?
Nobody patents radiation patterns.
Yeah, it's hard.
The 901 did not have any patent on its radiation pattern. People did try to copy it, but they sued them
Oh,
for something else. I don't know. Anyway,
wow. Interesting. Well, I think that's fascinating.
Thank you, gentlemen.
To hear more, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.